Marin didn't know that the man she'd been assigned to serve for the winter solstice celebration was the most powerful alpha in 5 kingdoms. She only knew that when he looked at her, something ancient and terrifying stirred beneath her ribs, and every instinct she possessed screamed at her to run. She couldn't run. Servants didn't run from their duties, no matter how their hands trembled as they poured wine into crystal goblets, or how their pulse hammered when broad shoulders blocked the doorway. Servants kept their eyes down, their voices soft, their existence as invisible as the flickering shadows cast by candlelight. Marin had perfected invisibility. 3 years in the Thornwood estate had taught her that being seen meant being vulnerable, and being vulnerable in a house full of wolves meant becoming prey. The great hall blazed with 1,000 candles tonight, their golden light dancing across silk tapestries and gilded frames. Nobles from every territory had gathered for the annual solstice treaty renewal, their laughter sharp and their smiles sharper. Marin moved between them like water through stone, her gray servant's dress deliberately drab against the explosion of jewel tones and precious metals. She felt him before she saw him. A prickle at the back of her neck, a sudden warmth blooming in her chest. Her wolf, usually so quiet, so carefully suppressed after years of hiding what she truly was, lifted its head and whined. Marin froze mid-step, her serving tray balanced perfectly despite the tremor in her fingers. Slowly, against every warning her mind shrieked at her, she raised her eyes. He stood in the arched doorway, and the room seemed to bend around him like light around a flame. Tall, impossibly tall, with shoulders that could block out the winter sun and eyes the color of a midnight storm. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that looked carved from marble and moonlight, all sharp angles and devastating shadows. He wore black, head to toe, unadorned save for a single silver pin at his throat, bearing an emblem she couldn't quite make out from this distance. Their eyes met. The world stopped. Something deep inside Marin's chest pulled taut, like a thread being drawn through the eye of a needle, and she felt it snap into place with an almost audible click. Her wolf howled, triumphant and terrified in equal measure, and the word that echoed through her skull made her blood turn to ice. Mate. No. No. No, no. The stranger's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, his nostrils flared, and then his gaze dropped to her servant's uniform, and something dark and dangerous flickered across his features before he schooled them into careful neutrality. Marin tore her eyes away, heart slamming against her ribs, and forced her feet to move. One step. Another. The servants' corridor was 20 feet away. She could make it. She could disappear into the kitchens and beg the head housekeeper to reassign her. Claim illness. Claim anything that would keep her away from whatever cosmic joke had just been played on her. A servant. Fate had bound her. An Omega in hiding. A woman with no name and no past and a future that extended only as far as her next meal, to whatever highborn alpha had just walked through those doors. She almost laughed. Almost. But the sound died in her throat when a hand closed around her elbow. Gentle. Impossibly gentle for its size, but firm enough that she couldn't pull away without causing a scene. You drop this. His voice was low and rough, like gravel wrapped in velvet, and it rolled through her like thunder. Marin looked down at his extended hand. A small linen napkin lay across his palm, one she didn't remember dropping. She hadn't dropped anything. She never dropped anything. "Thank you, my lord," she whispered, reaching for it with fingers that refused to stay steady. "Forgive my clumsiness." Their skin brushed. Just the barest whisper of contact, his fingertips against hers, and heat erupted through her veins like wildfire. She gasped, his jaw tightened. "Look at me." It wasn't a request. Power rippled through the words, alpha command woven through every syllable, and Marin's wolf responded before her mind could catch up. Her chin lifted, her eyes met his. This close, she could see the storm clouds shifting in his irises, could count the individual lashes framing them, thick and dark and devastating. A small scar interrupted his left eyebrow. His lips were pressed into a hard line, but there was something almost vulnerable lurking at their corners. "What's your name?" "Marin, my lord." She forced the words through numb lips. "I'm just the maid." Something cracked in his expression, something raw and wounded and quickly hidden. "Just the maid," he repeated softly, and the words sounded like a question, like a challenge, like a promise. Before we continue, please take 2 seconds to like this video. It tells me you want more stories like this. The stranger released her elbow, stepped back, and when he spoke again, his voice had cooled to aristocratic politeness. A mask slipping into place so smoothly, she almost believed she'd imagined the fire she'd seen burning beneath it. "Carry on then. Marin." Her name in his mouth felt like a brand, like a claim. She fled. The servants' corridor swallowed her into its familiar dimness, and Marin pressed her back against the cold stone wall, fighting to catch her breath. Her heart wouldn't slow. Her wolf wouldn't stop pacing, restless and wanting, straining toward a connection she'd spent her entire life praying she'd never feel. She knew what the bond meant. Every wolf knew. It was the fairy tale whispered to pups in their cradles, the dream that kept young hearts hoping. Your fated mate, your other half, the one soul in all the world that the moon goddess herself had chosen just for you. But fairy tales didn't account for the daughter of a disgraced pack, stripped of her rank and sold into servitude before she'd even presented. Fairy tales didn't explain what happened when an omega with nothing bound herself to an alpha with everything. Nothing good. That's what happened. Marin had seen it, had watched her own mother fade away after their pack fell, the bond to her father severing when he died, leaving her hollow and broken. Had witnessed servant girls disappear after catching the wrong nobleman's eye, their mates either unable or unwilling to claim them publicly. The bond was a death sentence dressed in moonlight, and Marin had no intention of dying. She would avoid him. Whatever lord or diplomat or visiting dignitary he was, he would leave after the solstice, return to whatever territory had spawned him, and the bond would fade with distance. That's what the old book said. If it wasn't consummated, if neither party accepted it, the thread would eventually wither and snap. She just had to survive until then. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. "You." The head housekeeper's voice cracked through the kitchen like a whip, and Marin looked up from the dishes she'd been scrubbing with raw, desperate focus. "The visiting Alpha King requested a personal attendant for the duration of his stay. You've been assigned." The soap slipped from Marin's numb fingers. "The Alpha what?" "King, girl. Are you deaf?" The housekeeper's eyes narrowed with barely concealed disdain. "King Caspian of Valerath. He specifically asked for you by name. Gods know why. Don't embarrass this house." King. The stranger in black was a king. The most powerful alpha in the known world, ruler of the largest territory, commander of an army that had never known defeat. The Wolf of Valerath, they called him. The Storm King. Stories painted him as ruthless, merciless, a cold and calculating predator who had united the fractured kingdoms under his banner through a combination of strategic genius and terrifying force. And he was her mate. Marin's legs nearly buckled. "I can't." The words escaped before she could stop them. "Please, I'll take any other assignment. I'm not qualified to attend a king." The housekeeper's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Qualified? You're a servant. Your qualifications are irrelevant. His Majesty asked for you, and you will serve him until he releases you from the duty. Now get yourself upstairs before I have you whipped for insubordination." There was no escape. No excuse that wouldn't raise suspicion, no illness she could feign that would release her from a king's direct command. Marin climbed the stairs to the east tower on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, each step bringing her closer to the ornate door at the end of the corridor. She knocked. Her knuckles barely made sound against the heavy wood. "Enter." The room beyond was draped in shadows. Only a single fire in the massive hearth, casting dancing light across expensive rugs and carved furniture. Caspian stood by the window, his silhouette outlined against the snow falling beyond the glass, and he didn't turn when she stepped inside. "Close the door." Marin obeyed. Her hands shook as she dropped into a curtsy, eyes fixed firmly on the floor. "Your Majesty requested a personal attendant. I am here to serve." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the pop and crackle of the fire. She could feel his gaze on her like a physical weight, could sense the bond humming between them, eager and insistent and utterly unwelcome. "Look at me, Marin." That voice. It did things to her she couldn't afford to feel. She kept her eyes down. "I couldn't possibly presume to meet your Majesty's eyes. It wouldn't be proper." A low sound rumbled from his chest, not quite a growl, but close enough that her wolf whimpered in response. "I didn't ask what was proper. I asked you to look at me." "With respect, Your Majesty, I am just the maid." She forced steel into her voice, forced her spine straight even as everything inside her screamed to submit, to bare her throat, to let him see her. "My purpose is to serve, not to presume familiarity." Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Each one sending her heart rate higher until he stood directly before her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell pine and snow and something darker. Something that made her mouth water. "You felt it." Not a question. "In the Great Hall. When our eyes met. You felt it too." Denial rose to her lips. She swallowed it. "I don't know what you mean, Your Majesty. Don't lie to me." His voice hardened. "I may be many things, but I am not a fool, and I will not tolerate dishonesty between us. You felt the bond snap into place. I saw it in your eyes before you ran." "I didn't run. I returned to my duties. You fled like a rabbit before a wolf." He paused. "Although I suppose that comparison is rather on the nose, given the circumstances." Against her will, against every self-preservation instinct screaming at her, Marin's lips twitched. She bit down on the inside of her cheek to keep the smile from forming. "Look at me." This time, the command was softer, almost pleading. "Please." The please undid her. Slowly, reluctantly, Marin raised her eyes, and found him closer than she'd realized, near enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray irises, could trace the tension in his jaw, could watch the muscle in his throat flex as he swallowed. "I'm just the maid," she whispered. "I'm no one. I have nothing. You're a king." Caspian's hand rose. His fingers hovered beside her face, not quite touching, a question rather than a demand. When she didn't flinch away, didn't retreat, he cupped her chin with devastating gentleness and tilted her face up to meet his gaze fully. "Not to me." 3 words. They shouldn't have meant anything. They shouldn't have cracked open something fragile and long protected in her chest, shouldn't have made her eyes burn with tears she hadn't shed in years. But they did. Gods help her. They did. "You don't know me," she managed. "You don't know what I am, what I've done, where I came from." "Then tell me." His thumb traced along her jawline, featherlight. "We have until the solstice. Tell me everything and let me decide for myself what you are." She should have pulled away, should have insisted on maintaining the proper distance between servant and sovereign, should have protected herself from the inevitable heartbreak that would come when he learned the truth and rejected her anyway. Instead, she found herself sinking into a chair by the fire, his cloak draped over her shoulders when he noticed her shivering, a cup of mulled wine pressed into her hands by fingers that seemed far too gentle to belong to the Storm King of legend. And she told him, not everything. Not at first, but pieces. The fall of her pack when she was 12. The auction block where she'd been sold alongside her mother. The years of servitude, of keeping her head down, of hiding the omega nature that would have made her a target in a house full of high-born wolves who saw unbonded omegas as nothing more than breeding stock. Caspian listened without interrupting, His expression grew darker with each revelation, a storm gathering behind his eyes, but his touch remained gentle where his hand had found hers somewhere during her telling. The Thornwoods know what you are? No. Marin shook her head. I've taken suppressants since I was 15. Saved every spare coin I could scrape together to buy them from a traveling herbalist. As far as anyone knows, I'm a beta with no significant rank. And now? Are you still taking them? She hesitated. I ran out 3 weeks ago. The herbalist hasn't returned, and I don't have enough money to buy from the apothecary in town. Understanding flickered across his features. That's why the bond hit so hard. Why I could sense you from across the hall. A muscle jumped in his jaw. You're approaching heat. The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Marin couldn't meet his eyes. I have perhaps a week before it becomes obvious. I was planning to request leave, to hide somewhere in the forest until it passed. She laughed hollow. I suppose that plan is rather obsolete now. Marin. His voice was rough, strained. I need you to understand something. The bond doesn't obligate you to anything. You felt it? Yes. And so did I. But feeling it and accepting it are different things. If you want me to request a different servant, to keep my distance until I leave, I will. It will be difficult, but I will do it. She stared at him, the most powerful alpha in the world, offering to walk away from a fated bond because she was afraid. Why? Because you've spent your entire life having choices taken from you. His gray eyes burned into hers. Because you are not property, despite what they've made you believe. Because I have waited 200 years for this bond, and I refuse to let it become another cage for you. 200 years. She'd known wolves lived longer than humans, knew that alpha kings could measure their lives in centuries rather than decades. But hearing it spoken aloud made her head spin. You've been alone all this time? Something sad flickered across his face. I'd given up, if I'm honest. Decided that perhaps the moon goddess had forgotten me, or deemed me unworthy. And then I walked into a stranger's great hall and saw a servant girl with fire in her eyes, and felt the world click into place for the first time in my very long life. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear that had escaped her braid. Let me court you, Marin. Properly, not as king to servant, but as alpha to omega, as mate to mate. Let me show you what you're worth before you decide whether or not to accept the bond. She should say no. Every survival instinct, every lesson learned through years of suffering, demanded she protect herself from this impossible hope. And if I decide not to accept, then I will let you go. The words seemed to cost him something. I won't pretend it wouldn't devastate me, but I would rather lose you to your own choice than keep you through obligation. Marin studied his face for a long moment, searched for the lie, the hidden cruelty, the inevitable betrayal she'd learned to expect from anyone with power over her. She found only sincerity, and longing, and a vulnerability that looked entirely foreign on the face of the Storm King. 1 week, she heard herself say, until the solstice ends and you're meant to return home. Court me until then, and I'll give you my answer before you leave. His smile transformed him, made him look younger, softer, almost boyish despite the silver at his temples and the ancient weight in his eyes. 1 week, he agreed. I should warn you, little Omega, I've never lost a battle I truly wanted to win. The days that followed were unlike anything Marin had ever experienced. Caspian didn't remove her from service entirely, understanding somehow that such a public shift would raise dangerous questions. Instead, he simply ensured that her duties brought her to his side constantly, finding reasons to require her presence that ranged from legitimate to transparently fabricated. She brought him breakfast and stayed to share it when he insisted he couldn't eat alone. She tidied his chambers and found herself drawn into conversations about everything from politics to poetry, discovering a mind as sharp as any blade and a wit that made her laugh despite herself. She accompanied him to treaty negotiations as his personal attendant and watched in wonder as he navigated the treacherous waters of noble politics with an ease that made it look effortless. And in the quiet moments between, he courted her. Small gifts left where only she would find them. A warm scarf in her favorite color, appearing on her bed without explanation. A book of fairy tales she'd mentioned loving as a child, the pages illuminated with gold leaf. A single winter rose placed in her serving quarters, its petals the exact silver gray of his eyes. He asked questions, remembered her answers, showed interest in the person beneath the servant's uniform with an intensity that was almost overwhelming, as if everything she said was precious, worthy of attention, important. The fourth night, he found her crying in the corridor. One of the Thornwood sons had cornered her in the wine cellar, had pressed her against the wall, and breathed threats against her ear while his hands wandered where they didn't belong. She'd fought free, had fled before anything truly terrible could happen, but the fear and the humiliation had shattered something fragile inside her. Marin. Caspian's voice cut through her panic, and suddenly he was there, pulling her into his arms, wrapping her in warmth and safety and pine-scented comfort. What happened? Who hurt you? She told him, felt his entire body go rigid against hers, felt the growl building in his chest like approaching thunder. Which one? It wasn't a question. It was a death sentence wrapped in 3 syllables. Your Majesty, please. She gripped his arms, forcing him to look at her. If you challenge him, if you cause an incident, the treaty negotiations will collapse. You can't start a war over a servant. I can. His eyes had gone dark, wolf bleeding through man. I would. For you, I would burn the entire world and count it a fair trade. Caspian. His name in her mouth seemed to startle them both. She'd never used it before, never presumed such intimacy. But it worked. The darkness in his eyes receded slightly, though the fury remained. Please, I'm not worth a war. He cupped her face in both hands. His thumbs wiped the tears from her cheeks with infinite tenderness. You are worth everything, he said quietly, but I will respect your wishes. There will be no public challenge, no political incident. A dangerous smile curved his lips. However, I make no promises about what might happen to young Lord Thornwood in a dark corridor when no witnesses are present. The next morning, the Thornwood son appeared at breakfast with a broken arm, 2 black eyes, and a sudden, inexplicable terror that made him flinch every time he so much as glimpsed a servant uniform. No one could explain it, and the Alpha King of Vilarath simply smiled into his wine and changed the subject. The night before the solstice celebration, Marin came to his chambers for what they both knew might be the last time. Her heat was coming. She could feel it building under her skin, making her sensitive and restless and achingly aware of every time his fingers brushed hers. Tomorrow, the treaty would be signed. Tomorrow, he would leave. I need to tell you something, she said, standing before the fire while he watched from his chair. Before I give you my answer. Anything. My pack. She took a breath. The one that fell when I was a child. We weren't just any pack. My father was the Alpha of the Silver Hollow territory. We were one of the founding families of the Old Alliance, before you united the kingdoms. She watched understanding dawn in his eyes. The Silver Hollow massacre. I remember. It was one of the conflicts that convinced me the territories needed to be unified, that we couldn't continue destroying each other through endless feuds. My father refused to bend the knee to a foreign alpha, even one as powerful as you, so Lord Thornwood and 3 other packs joined forces to eliminate us, to curry favor with the coming king. Bitterness crept into her voice. I was 12. I watched my father die. I watched my mother sold, and I have spent every day since then surviving in the house of the man who ordered it. Caspian had gone very still. You're telling me, he said slowly, that you've been enslaved for 15 years in the household of your family's murderer. Yes. And you think this changes things between us? That it makes you somehow less worthy of the bond? I think you should know exactly who you're asking to be your queen. The word felt foreign on her tongue. Impossible. A traumatized Omega with no pack, no resources, no political value. A servant girl with vengeance in her heart and no idea how to be anything else. He rose from his chair, crossed to her in 3 long strides, took her hands in his. I'm asking you to be my mate, he said. Not a political asset, not a broodmare to secure alliances. You, Marin. Just you. The woman who makes me laugh and argues with me about poetry and faces down her nightmares with more courage than most warriors I've known. I'm afraid. The confession escaped in a whisper. I'm afraid of wanting this, of believing in it, of letting myself hope. I know. He pressed his forehead to hers. Let me be brave enough for both of us then. Let me carry the hope until you're ready to hold it yourself. She kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't careful or strategic or safe. One moment she was drowning in fear, and the next her hands were fisting in his shirt, and her lips were pressing against his, and his arms were banding around her like he was afraid she might disappear. The bond between them sang. That golden thread that had been humming since the first moment their eyes met suddenly blazed to life, and she could feel him. Not just his body against hers, but his emotions, his overwhelming relief, his desperate hope, his love, vast and terrifying and completely unconditionally hers. He kissed her back with an intensity that stole her breath. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling it free from its braid, and when they finally broke apart, they were both trembling. Marin. Her name was a prayer on his lips. Please. Yes. The word felt like freedom, like flying, like coming home. My answer is yes. The solstice celebration the next night was the talk of every territory in the realm. The Alpha King of Vylarath appeared with a mysterious woman on his arm, dressed not in servant's gray, but in a gown of midnight blue silk that matched the evening sky. He presented her to the assembled nobility as his fated mate, his chosen queen, his partner in all things. Lord Thornwood turned the color of curdled milk. His wife fainted. His son, still sporting the remnants of 2 black eyes, simply fled the hall entirely. And when the king announced that part of the new treaty would include the investigation and prosecution of crimes committed during the War of Unification, specifically those involving the massacre of innocent Pax and the illegal enslavement of their survivors, the room fell into shocked silence. Justice, it seemed, had finally arrived in the Thornwood estate, and it wore a crown. 3 months later, Marin stood on the balcony of her new chambers in the Palace of Vylarath, watching snow fall over the kingdom that was now her home. Arms wrapped around her from behind. Caspian's chin settled on her shoulder, his warmth chasing away the winter chill. You're supposed to be in a council meeting, she murmured, leaning back into his embrace. I was. I left. His lips brushed her ear. The Minister of Trade was being tedious, and I decided my queen's company was vastly more appealing than debating grain tariffs. The council will be scandalized. Good. They need occasional scandal. Keeps them alert. He turned her in his arms, and his smile when he looked at her still made her heart skip. How are you feeling? Is the nausea any better? Marin's hand drifted to her stomach, to the tiny life beginning to grow there. The pack healer had confirmed it just that morning. Better. Your mother's ginger tea helped. She'll be insufferable when she finds out. She's been waiting for grandpups for centuries. Then we should probably tell her before she guesses. She's terrifyingly perceptive. Tomorrow, he pulled her closer. Tonight, I want you to myself. My mate. My queen. My everything. Marin smiled up at him. Thought about the servant girl she'd been only months ago. The one who'd believed herself unworthy of love, of happiness, of hope. That girl felt like a stranger now, a ghost from another life. I love you, she said, still surprised by how easily the words came. Caspian kissed her forehead, her nose, the corner of her mouth. And I love you, Marin. from now until the stars go dark. You are not just anything. You have never been just anything. And I will spend the rest of our very long lives making sure you never forget it." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the kingdom in peaceful white. And in the arms of her mate, her king, the girl who had once been just the maid, finally allowed herself to believe in fairy tales. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts. And if you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people hear these stories.